Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a conflict that's really grabbed global attention, the escalating situation between Israel and Iran.
Indeed, a major flashpoint.
But we want to do more than just the headlines. Our mission today is to zero in on how this is hitting, often in unexpected ways, across East and Southeast Asia.
Right, a region that seems distant but is deeply connected.
Exactly. We're talking Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam. It's a long list. And we've gathered insights from a whole range of sources, Nikkei Asia, CNN, Al Jazeera, the Financial Express, you name it, to really unpack what this means for this critical part of the world.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, how a conflict so far away geographically can send such significant tremors through this region.
It really is.
It just underscores how interconnected everything is now. Distance isn't the buffer it once was. We'll be looking at, several layers of impact, diplomatic reactions, economic fallout, strategic shifts.
Lots to cover. So let's start with those initial reactions. Reports around June 13th, 2025 indicated Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. How did Asia react right off the bat?
Well, the condemnation was pretty swift and widespread from several key players. China, Japan, Indonesia, Malaysia, they all came out quite quickly condemning the strikes.
Okay, and what was the immediate context there? What was happening right before those strikes?
That timing is important. The Israeli action happened just a day after the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, had declared Iran was actually in breach of its nuclear non-proliferation obligations.
Okay.
And the Israel Defense Forces were very direct, stating Iran was closer than ever to obtaining a nuclear weapon. They framed it as an existential threat.
So Israel presented it as preemptive, essentially.
There's the justification, yes. And these Asian condemnations were, in part, a reaction to that move by Israel.
Let's dig into China's response then, because that seemed particularly forthright. Beijing didn't just condemn. They called it a violation of Iran's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity.
They did.
And they explicitly stated support for Iran's legitimate rights and interests. That's quite a strong stance.
Yeah.
What's the thinking there?
Well, it seems China is playing a multifaceted game here. On one hand, yes, that's strong condemnation, but simultaneously they're positioning themselves as a potential peace broker.
Interesting. How so?
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi reportedly got on the phone with both his Iranian and Israeli counterparts, offering to, and I quote, play a constructive role,
Okay.
and urging other countries, specifically those with influence over Israel, to make concrete efforts to restore peace. So it's condemnation plus this offer of mediation. It's also about presenting China as a different kind of global player than the U.S.
That really stands out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially when you compare it to, say, their refusal to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Exactly. That contrast is stark. It signals, you could argue, a hardening of these geopolitical lines, with China positioning itself more clearly in opposition to the U.S. on certain fronts.
So is this partly about challenging U.S. influence in the Middle East, offering a different path?
I think that's definitely part of the calculation. And you have to remember China's deep ties with Iran strategically and economically.
Right, the energy connection is huge.
Absolutely. China is Iran's biggest energy customer, often navigating around U.S. sanctions through, let's say, indirect channels. And we've seen them collaborating more openly, too, like with joint naval drills.
And then there were those reports, weren't there, around mid-June about mysterious Chinese cargo planes landing in Iran.
Yes, those reports added another layer of intrigue, allegedly carrying military supplies with their tracking transponders switched off.
Wow.
Now, if that's true, it suggests a level of coordination, maybe even military cooperation, that goes well beyond just diplomatic statements or oil purchases. It hints at something deeper.
It certainly makes you think. And China wasn't just making statements. They were taking practical steps, too, weren't they? Advising their citizens.
That's right. Both China's UN ambassador Fu Kong and their embassy in Tel Aviv put out advisories. The embassy in Tel Aviv specifically urged Chinese nationals to get out of Israel.
Citing what?
A deteriorating security environment and the potential for a sharp increase in civilian casualties. That kind of evacuation advisory is a significant signal from Beijing.
Definitely sounds like it. Okay, so let's shift focus eastward now towards Japan. How did Tokyo react? Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba seemed quite strong in his condemnation, too.
Yes, he was. He called Israel's attack totally intolerable and extremely regrettable. Pretty forceful language from Japan.
And he urged restraint from all sides, specifically mentioning potential retaliation from Iran as well.
Correct. He called for everyone to avoid actions that could escalate things further. Japan's position here is, well, it's quite delicate.
How so? What makes it delicate?
Japan's in a unique spot. It's a major economy, but resource poor. So it's traditionally kept friendly ties with Iran, relying on it for crude oil imports.
Okay, so there's the energy dependency.
Right. But at the same time, Japan is a very close security ally of the United States, so it has to balance these relationships.
A real tightrope walk then.
Exactly. They need to uphold international norms and stability, hence the condemnation, but without completely alienating a key energy source or their main security guarantor. It requires very careful diplomatic footwork.
So beyond the official statements, what did this mean on the ground for Japanese citizens in the area?
The reaction was quick there, too. The Japanese Foreign Ministry raised its travel advisory for Iran straight to level 3, that's avoid all travel.
Right.
And for Israel, it went to level 3 or even higher across the whole country, basically warning of likely retaliation.
And they advised citizens to leave.
Yes, they advised the roughly 400 Japanese nationals who were in Iran at the time to consider leaving the country. Again, that shows a serious level of concern.
And Prime Minister Ishiba is taking this to the international stage.
That's the plan. He intends to explain Japan's position at the upcoming G7 summit in Canada. It underscores that for Japan, this isn't just a distant Middle East issue, it's about global peace and stability, which directly impacts Japan.
Right, because those ripples spread wide. Which brings us nicely to Southeast Asia. Our sources suggest this conflict is having a really profound impact there, reshaping the strategic thinking, even though it's thousands of miles away.
Yes, that's a key point. Distance really doesn't mean immunity in today's world. The economic shockwaves are probably the most immediate concern for many Asian nations.
You mean the oil connection again?
Primarily, yes.
Oh.
Think about the Strait of Hormuz. Iran threatening to close it, even partially, is a huge deal. About 20% of the world's oil goes through there.
And that directly impacts the Strait of Malacca.
Directly. Malacca is the main highway for that Middle Eastern crude heading to East Asia. So trouble in Hormuz means instant congestion, delays, and skyrocketing costs in Malacca.
What kind of costs?
We're talking global shipping rates, insurance premiums for tankers.
Yeah.
They soar. And of course, energy prices become incredibly volatile. It creates huge uncertainty.
You can imagine the anxiety for anyone involved in shipping or relying on those imports.
Definitely. And for countries like Malaysia and Thailand, who are net oil importers, this isn't abstract economic theory.
No, it hits home.
It means real inflationary pressure. It strains their fuel subsidy programs, puts pressure on government budgets that are likely already stretched.
And Indonesia, Vietnam, also exposed.
Yes, they're also vulnerable to these global commodity price swings. So this conflict, far away as it is, directly impacts the cost of living for ordinary people across Southeast Asia.
Which then puts these governments in a tough spot geopolitically too, right?
Yeah.
Walking another tightrope.
A very tricky one. You have the U.S. expecting its allies to, well, act like allies. You see existing logistics routes through Singapore being important, maybe expanded air defense in the Philippines.
Right.
But then you have China, heavily reliant on that Iranian oil we mentioned. Beijing might use this situation to push harder on its Belt and Road projects or deepen military ties in the region.
Potentially pulling countries in different directions.
And then add U.S. pressure on ASEAN countries to tighten up on secondary sanctions against Iran. That could really divide the region, forcing choices on nations that would much rather stay neutral.
Which raises the question about ASEAN's famous neutrality. Is this conflict putting that whole principle under serious strain?
I think it has to, doesn't it? There's a real risk this could trigger, or at least accelerate, an arms race in the region.
How so?
You might see countries like Vietnam or Indonesia looking to deepen their defense partnerships, maybe with Japan or Australia or India as a hedge.
And the smaller states?
They could potentially become bargaining chips in these larger power plays, rather than charting their own course. The pressure on that non-aligned stance is immense.
And it's not just military strategy, is it? There are other dimensions.
Oh, absolutely. Economically, beyond oil, you've got currencies like the Malaysian ringgit, the Indonesian rupiah, the Thai baht already feeling pressure from capital outflows. War jitters just make that worse.
So central banks face tough choices.
Very tough. Do you spend reserves to defend the currency, or do you let it slide and risk importing more inflation? There are no easy answers.
And technology, cybersecurity.
That's another crucial angle. This kind of conflict fuels the so-called shadow wars in
Mm.
cyberspace, covert digital attacks, often state-backed.
Right.
And that's a huge risk for critical hubs in the region, especially for semiconductors, places like Malaysia, Taiwan. Sources describe them as potentially alarmingly underprepared for really large-scale cyber conflict.
A lot of interconnected risks there. Okay, let's turn finally to India. Our sources paint a picture of India performing a particularly delicate balancing act here.
Yes, India's position is really quite fascinating. One of the most striking things is how India distanced itself from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's statement condemning Israel's attacks.
The SKO. That includes China, Russia, and Iran itself, right?
Exactly. The SKO came out strongly against Israel's aggressive actions, calling them a gross violation of international law. But India didn't join that collective condemnation.
So why not? India's External Affairs Minister, Jai Shankar, did express deep concern and call for de-escalation, but they went their own way. What's behind that?
It really comes down to India's complex and sometimes contradictory relationships in the region. On one side, India is actually Israel's largest buyer of weapons.
Really, largest buyer.
Largest buyer. There were reports in 2024 about Indian firms selling rockets and explosives to Israel. That's a huge factor.
Okay.
But at the very same time, India is heavily invested in developing Iran's Chabahar port.
Right, the port project, that's about trade routes, isn't it?
It's absolutely vital for India. It's seen as a gateway to Central Asia and Afghanistan,
Yeah.
crucially bypassing their rival Pakistan. So they have major stakes in both Israel and Iran.
That is a balancing act. How does the U.S. relationship fit into this puzzle for India?
Well, some sources suggest India's decision not to join the SKO statement might be linked to its desire for a trade agreement with the U.S., especially with the potential threat of U.S. tariffs looming.
The trade angle.
And remember, U.S. sanctions under former President Trump, particularly the ones that suspended waivers for the Chabahar port project, directly threatened India's multi-million-dollar investment there.
So is India prioritizing the U.S. economic relationship over solidarity with some SEO's partners on this issue?
It certainly looks like a calculated move in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
India, despite maybe admiring some of Israel's muscular tactics, as some put it, simply cannot afford to look partisan.
Too many other interests at stake.
Far too many. India has significant economic and strategic equities across the entire Middle East, well beyond just its relationship with Israel or Iran. Alienating key players wouldn't serve its long-term interests or its ambitions as a rising global power.
So it's about maintaining maximum diplomatic flexibility.
Precisely. Keeping options open, avoiding being boxed in.
So wrapping this up, what's the big picture for you, our listener? This deep dive really shows the Israel-Iran conflict isn't just happening over there.
Not at all. It's sending complex waves across the globe.
We've seen this intricate web of diplomacy, economics, security concerns, reaching deep into East and Southeast Asia, fundamentally affecting countries far from the immediate fighting.
Absolutely. We've seen nations across the region making really complex calculations, balancing energy needs, crucial trade routes, their geopolitical alignments, even worrying about their citizens caught in the middle. The tremors from this clash are genuinely reshaping regional priorities.
Yeah, whether it's through these diplomatic statements we talked about, or strategic adjustments, or even those, quiet movements of cargo planes, the region is clearly reacting, adapting.
It just highlights again how tightly interconnected our world has become. What happens in one corner can and does affect calculations everywhere else.
A powerful reminder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive today.